Hello, Internet. This is the Fitness Reborn podcast. My name is Sean from Renaissance Fitness Personal Training, where we put movement ahead of workouts. And my guest today is Zoe Thompson. Zoe is an international strongwoman competitor. She was ranked second in the UK, ninth overall in Europe. She is a life and well-being coach of over 10 years, a domestic abuse survivor, 10-year veteran of the UK Police Service, the owner of the Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching, and she is, of course, a parent. Thank you so much for coming on, Zoe.
Thank you for having me. Good to meet you.
Yeah, good to talk. So those of you who don't know, and there's no reason why you would, we had a little snafu last time. Hopefully things will go much better this time, technology-wise. That's just kind of the price of the game you play here when you're, doing internet-based interviews, and I guess especially when they're across large distances. So
yeah.
So, anyways, Zoe, so let's kick things off right here. So let's go to the heart of what you do here. Talk to us about Phoenix Life and Wellbeing.
There's so much to talk about. I always find this really difficult to summarize succinctly. I guess the best way to describe what I do is put it under the umbrella of self-development. So it's coaching, it's training, it's ultimately helping people become a better version of themselves, whatever that looks like. And that might be lifestyle, it might be well-being, it might be in organizations around leadership. It's really varied, which is great because I love the variety. I get bored very quickly. So I love the fact that I work with teenagers right through to, adults that are in their 60s and 70s. I work with individuals and I work with organizations as well. So it's really varied. But it is lifestyle, it is well-being, but it's also a lot of self-development as well, whether that's mental, physical, or emotional.
Gotcha. So you chose the symbol of the phoenix. I think probably very strategically. So we could talk all day long about the phoenix here, and how it comes to embody the people who adopt it. So now I think the phoenix, as it relates to your business, probably is obvious. How does it relate to you?
Yeah, I guess it's similar to yours with it being reborn, isn't it? I think the reason why I chose the Phoenix was because I think for me it really resonated in, I don't think, and I know some people will have a different perspective on this, I don't think you can go back to who you were after you faced a period of adversity. Whatever that looks like, whatever the level of adversity is, I don't think you can go back to who you are. I think there's a great saying, no, the same man doesn't step into the same river twice. It's either a different man or a different river. And I think when we go through something, we change, we grow, we evolve, we learn more about ourselves, we learn more about other people, we learn more about life. And I don't think it is possible to go back to who you are or who you were before. And for me, it's that evolution. It's taking your adversity, taking your challenges, and using that as a platform and a springboard to grow and evolve rather than something that holds you back. So for me, the Phoenix was a really obvious choice. And I think a lot of life coaches, they're the phoenix, the butterfly. I think there are lots of different images that resonate with a lot of people. But for me, it was about the growth and evolution, and that, the rising from the ashes, that even when you think you are at your lowest point, there's still opportunity for that rebirth and that growth, and taking everything that has happened to you and using that for a positive. And one of the things that I talk through a lot with clients is understanding what you tapped into to get through periods of adversity is what you tap into proactively to grow and move forward. And for me, then that's why the Phoenix was really important. And I think for my own story as well, it wasn't about trying to get back to who I was before. I didn't want to go back to who I was before. I wanted to make sure that I used the opportunity of that rebirth, if you like, to shape who I wanted to be and who I wanted to be in the future, rather than, I think, being shaped by others, which was what had happened before.
So who were you before?
I don't know. I don't know that I knew who I was before. I think life had kind of shaped me. I think for me, it's the downside, if you like, of being quite easygoing and going with the flow is that the flow shapes you. And I think it's great to be easygoing, but if you don't set your direction and you don't make those decisions and you go at the flow of life or other people's decisions, then that's what sets the direction rather than you. And I think I had made lots of decisions, but they weren't really my decisions. I had opportunities and I took them, and I don't have any regrets, but I think I hadn't spent any time working out who I was and who I wanted to be. So I was being shaped by other people who had kind of made those decisions. And I think just very, very easily influenced, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know it was very difficult to, it's also a very long time ago. So it's a very long time ago to
Right.
think back that far. But yeah, I think I'm much more conscious now of the decisions that I make and the directions that I take myself in, that they are my decisions and it's what I want, which sounds incredibly selfish, but it's
No.
self-centered, I guess, because it's me at the center. But if you only get one shot at life, I want to make sure that I'm doing the things that I want to do and the direction that I want to go in.
Yeah, that's kind of it seems to me kind of like the growth curve of life itself, isn't it? I mean, because I think all of us, to some degree, we're kind of pack animals up to a certain point, and then maybe, and some people are kind of just natural born leaders, and they're always the people that have like a group of an entourage of folks following them, doing anything they want, and you know I think probably there's fewer of those than there are of the ones who just kind of go with the flow. I know I'm kind of that person too, and yeah, I agree. It's great to be an easygoing person. It makes people very comfortable around you,
Mm-hmm.
um, because you're not as outwardly aggressive as some others are. But yeah, it does tend to just lead you in directions that you later find were not the place you wanted to be, and so you have to kind of grow into that assertive self. Was that
Yeah,
your
it's a really good
experience?
way of describing it.
Yeah. So was that your development as well too? It's like you just kind of like you found yourself in a place that you didn't want to be, and so then you made movements to get out of it once you realized just how bad it was.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage of rising up from the ashes, is that you really are starting from scratch. So you get to decide, okay, if I'm rising up from this and I've literally coming from a complete restart, what do I want that to look like? And I think for me, the physical changes, my physical health was the obvious one to start with. But I also don't think that I truly realized the healing that was needed from a mental and emotional point of view as well. So the physical side of it felt like that was the obvious thing to do. Okay, you're not in good shape physically, you're not well physically, so let's start with that, because I think that's a lot easier on paper to work out. And I think as I went through that process, losing weight, getting some health and fitness back, that I realized actually how much mentally and emotionally there was work that needed to be done as well. And then that, I think the fitness side of it came in with that. And I think it took me by surprise how much working on my fitness, getting into the gym, having a personal trainer eventually, how much that was actually shaping my mental and emotional health as much as it was kind of rebuilding my physical health as well.
So, like I mentioned earlier when we started the recording here, you have a background of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, is that where a lot of your life and well-being coaching springs from? Is from that background? Is where these metaphors about rising from the ashes and birth and starting again. Um, was that kind of the big mover and shaker of what now is your business, or is it just kind of like a composite of that experience combined with others?
I think probably the latter. I mean, I think the coming out of that relationship was the catalyst for the changes. And I think I went through a number of changes over a period of time. And actually, the coaching side of things initially was around nutrition coaching because I'd gone through such a physical change. I was getting approached quite a lot to ask, you're looking so much better. What is it that you're doing? And so I wanted to learn for myself. Initially, it was all, again, all about me. I wanted to learn it for me. I wanted to understand
Right.
for me. And I think nutrition is, it's one of those topics, isn't it? That the research changes a lot of the perspectives a lot of the time. So I wanted to understand it for myself. But actually, I was working for the police at the time and had a role as a mentor and a self-development trainer with the police at that time as well. So I would say that probably shaped the coaching and the business probably more so. But I think, there was a lot about myself I learned in that period of time, which probably does shape, well, it definitely shapes who I am today. But it wasn't the catalyst for bringing me into coaching. I think that was probably more my professional life that shaped that. But I think it's an element of it, although there's a lot of people that I work with that don't necessarily know that about me because it's one chapter of my life that as I get older, that chapter becomes one of many chapters that sometimes it's relevant for people and sometimes it isn't, dependent on the work that I'm doing. So I think my professional life probably shaped it more so than my personal life. But I think, with anything that we do, we bring ourselves into that, don't we? So I think it certainly deepened my understanding of people and how people tick and, how mentally, emotionally, and physically, all of these things are linked in together. So I think there's an element of it that definitely helps. But I think that probably more my professional path led me into this rather than my personal path. But they do run alongside and then merged together.
How did you get into Strongwoman competitions?
That came off the back of the physical training. So I lost quite a lot of weight after coming out of that relationship. Lost a lot of weight, got back into the gym, and really enjoyed it. But I found initially I was doing lots of cardio stuff. And then met a personal trainer in the gym who was one of the instructors in one of the classes that I was doing, and he persuaded me to go in and give strength training a go, and that was a big game changer for me because it completely changed. It really flipped the switch around my mindset around physically. It became less about how much I weighed and what I looked like and more about what my body could do, and
Right.
just really changed, pushing those barriers over what I thought I could do and then what my PT would put on the bar and tell me to lift. And I would look at it and think, you got no chance. And he's like, Zoe, just pick it up and put it back down again. That's all I'm asking you to do. Like, don't overthink it. Just do it. And strength training for me just really pushed through some of my sort of beliefs around what I could do. And I think, having somebody, like a personal trainer who gives you that push, who sees that potential before you recognize it yourself, is incredibly powerful. And for me, the stronger I got in the gym, the more I found I was getting more confident outside of the gym as well. Long story short, with the Strongwoman, I was really enjoying the strength training. My PT said to me, actually, you're strong in the gym, but how do you compare with other people? And then one of the other gyms in Bristol was doing an open day for Strongwoman, which is quite a unique sport, and especially years ago, definitely a unique sport. Not very many women did it. Went to the open day, and as we were leaving, the gym owner said he was putting on the first ever competition for women in Bristol, and would we sign up to it? Signed up, and the rest, as they say, is history. I did well in that competition, signed up for another, did well in that one, signed up for another, went to a regional one, did surprisingly well in that one. That qualified me for England's, which qualified me for Britain's, which qualified me for Europe's. And within a year, I was competing at Europe's Strongest Woman, which was just completely different, because you were getting to that stage of, amateur competitions into, some people who do this, do this for a living. So it was a very steep learning curve over quite a short period of time, but I loved every minute of it. I love the challenge. It's a great sport for variety. You have to train everything all of the time, because you don't know what the events are going to be until 6 weeks out. So it meant that I, was always shaking up my training and being able to do that. But it's a great sport. It's a very supportive sport, and I know it's big in the US.
Oh yes,
well. Very big in the US.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for as short of a time as it was, I mean, and you say you got into a whole different world when you got into the Europe-wide competition. Still, you came in 9th. Still cracked the top 10, so that's still impressive on its own.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting when people, even just thinking back on it now, because none of that was ever planned. It was just a case of, okay, well, now you've qualified for the next competition, right? Okay, then the events would come through, and I'd look at it, and I'd look at the weights, and I think, I can't even lift this once, and in 8 weeks' time you want me to get as many reps as possible in 60 seconds. At the moment, I can't even get this off the floor. So the whole kind of training process, mentally was as tough as it was physically, because you was just constantly failing, and I think that's one of the great things about strength training, is that it does reshape your relationship with failure, because when you fail and you fail the next way up, you're one step closer to what you're trying to get to. So looking at 8-week plans and thinking, right, in 8 weeks' time, I'm going to have to lift this multiple times in front of a crowd full of people. Yet right now, I can't even get this thing off the floor. Is just, and then just every week, just pushing and pushing, and then it comes a little bit off the floor, and then you get one rep in, and then the next week you're going for a second, and you're doing that with 5 different events. It's it's great for focus, because you can't think about anything else when you're in there, and you've got your training plan in front of you. You just tap into that hyper focus of putting everything into each lift. So I learned so much mentally as much as I did physically. I think I'm a huge advocate for strength training, and still am, but it was a game changer for me, that's for sure.
What did you learn about yourself mentally?
That I was a lot stronger than I thought I was. I think I didn't know physically that I was that strong, but I think also, that pushing through. There's a great saying, and I use this all the time: getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you hear people say it all of the time, but the sport of Strongwoman is all about being uncomfortable. It's lifting really stupidly heavy and awkward things, and it hurts. It hurts for periods of time while you're trying to lift it or move it. But you push through that pain barrier, you push through what you think is possible all of the time. So you're constantly challenging what you think is possible and pushing through that, working until you make it possible. And I think now I'm able to apply that through all different aspects of life as well. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't look possible now, but if I break it down into those smaller steps and work on that over the next couple of weeks, then eventually there's no reason why that can't be possible.
Do you think things like strong man, strong woman competitions, and even things like, if you want to go even a step further, go like, say, MMA, things like that, combative sports. I know, like, for example, like MMA, boxing, that kind of stuff, it's very appealing to people who have, say, come into it from hard backgrounds. There's a lot of people in it who have been bullied when they were younger. They had troubled home lives and things like that. And there's an element to it that really kind of speaks to their experiences and speaks to maybe their overall personalities. And like you just said, it reshapes what you think failure is and what you think fear is. I know for like combative sports, you go into something like that, maybe it's boxing, and then you get punched in the face. And then you realize, okay, yeah, that hurt. That wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. So I could do this, and it's going to happen again and again and again. And, we hear like people like Mike Tyson say, like, everyone's got a plan until they take that first punch in the face. And then that plan just goes to hell. So, but do you think there's something about things like strong woman, strong man competitions and MMA and combative sports and things that require like physically grueling applications that really sort of like they awaken something inside of us, especially people who come from hard backgrounds, that is just unique onto itself?
I think it's the resilience as well. I think when the examples that you were giving there, you're talking about very resilient people, the people who have got up and picked themselves up over and over again. And I think the physical elements of any sport, yes, you've got a natural, physical DNA get up, which might put you at more of an advantage. But with any of these sports, whether it's strongman, strongwoman, MMA, boxing, you learn the sport. You learn the sport. Mentally, I think that resilience, I think that's the difference that makes the difference of that pushing through. Because all of these sports, I think any competitive sport is very easy to give up. And I think that's the difference that makes the difference between people who do it at a low hobby level and the people who do it at that competitive level, is that pushing through when everybody wants to give up. Because we all hit that stage at some point. We might hit it at different points, but we all hit that stage at one point where it's like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting this amount into training? Why am I hurting so much? Why am I going into work covered in bruises and where I've been training so hard, and why am I so exhausted? Why am I trying to hold down a full-time job and be a parent and still do this? And I think it's the resilience that makes the difference between the people that push through that to the people that stay at that level where, not saying it's comfortable, but it's more comfortable than taking that next step up. And I think people who have experienced that adversity, people who've had that upbringing or that time in their life where they've pushed through those challenges, they have that resilience to push through that pain point, that threshold of, when they want to tap out. And I think they have that extra resilience, that stronger resilience to be able to push through. I think that's the difference. And that's a mindset. It's a mindset thing, isn't it?
It is. So when I was researching you, I was going through your profile and whatnot. So you've made mentions that there is a difference what your mindset was then versus what it is now. We keep going back to this thing, mindset. This is a major theme. Now you said something that, you thought that there was something about you, at least looking back in hindsight, you thought there was something about you that separated the mind of someone who puts themselves in domestic abuse situations versus someone who doesn't, which is kind of like an artificial separator that we we make up to say, well, I will never be in that situation. I will never find myself in that situation. I will never allow that to happen. And then, sometimes we do. We wake up and we find ourselves, oh, it's gradually happening. I think we come to realize that slowly it kind of creeps in on you. It's not something that just kind of presents itself and say, hey, look at me. I'm going to abuse you in this relationship that we're in. It just kind of like seeps in very, very, very slowly. So how about you? Why don't you talk more on that? Because that's interesting. I think people need to hear something like that, because I think they see things like that. What to them from the outside looking in is very clearly a bad situation. And they say to themselves here, no way, I would never be that person.
I think there's a great saying, you can't see the label from the inside of the jar. And I think situations like that, the coercion and the manipulation that comes with it is a slow burner. It is not like, you're not sitting in water and the water's coming to the boil. That's what it is. You're not getting into boiling water. You're in water and it's slowly coming to the boil. I'm not saying that it's not easy to spot. I think there's, it definitely creeps up on what you find acceptable, that line that just keeps getting crossed, just keeps moving the boundaries. And I think when I look back, and I think my situation certainly is not unique. I am definitely not the only person who works for the police or was working for the police and was in that situation. I think the challenge that I found really difficult, and I think this is where denial comes into a lot of it, is that I was living that life and I was putting a uniform on in the mornings. I was going into work and presenting as a completely different person. And I was just in denial that this whole life was going on at home. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't share it with anybody. Just would go through the motions each day of going in and going to work. But the crazy thing for me was that I was working with victims of domestic abuse when I was going into work. I was speaking to people and saying, we can help you, we can support, we can do this, we can do that. And then I was going home to that situation. So there was a massive sense of denial, I think, into what that situation was. But these things don't just happen quickly. There's a lot of coercion. There's a lot of the manipulation side of things that I think in recent years people talk about a lot more. You're talking kind of 15 years ago now. So I think things have changed. I think it's spoken about a lot more openly. And I think people recognize the coercion and manipulation side of it that has the biggest impact. I think that, that's not to say that the violence doesn't have its impact, but it's the coercion and manipulation that is what pulls you apart as a person. And so what you are able to deal with becomes a lot less as time goes on. And I think also it's the challenge of these situations, and which is what a lot of people find really difficult, is that leaving that situation is a higher risk than staying. And also it's what you know how to cope in the situation that you're in. You learn how to cope, which is a sad state of affairs in itself, but you learn how to cope in the situation that you're in. Coming out of that situation, you don't know what that's going to be like. And there's a higher risk leaving that situation than there is staying. And that's the biggest challenge for a lot of people, is that they know the risk is higher. A lot of the homicides, murders happen when the person tries to leave because the individual is losing control. And so for them to regain that control, they increase those actions. And so you get that escalation. So a lot of people stay because that's the safer option, which is, it for people on the outside. I fully understand that that's a really difficult situation for people to understand, but that's and every situation is unique, and every individual experiences it in different ways. But that's part of the challenge. Is you sometimes it's not easier, but you understand and you know what you're dealing with. Whereas trying to make a change, you don't know what you're dealing with. But I think that applies to everything. It's a lot of people stay in a situation they're in, whether that's their health, whether that's their mindset, whether it's the job that they're in, whether it's a family situation that they're in. People, it's easier to stay with what you know than it is to step into the unknown and have to deal with things differently. I think it's the same for everybody. Stepping outside of what's familiar is a scary place to be. It's just the add with that, with a domestic abuse situation, is that there's a risk with it as well. So not only is it scary because you don't know it, there's also the added, statistically, there's an added risk when you do that as well. So it makes it an even more difficult decision to make.
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering that humans are incredibly adaptive, and even adaptive to environments that are not good for them. So whether you're talking about domestic abuse or you're talking about unhealthy eating habits or whatever, your natural evolutionary instinct is going to be adapt to whatever is working for you, quote unquote, working for you, and just let it be as it is. And what you touched on earlier, what you just said was like, well, there's the physical danger of actually leaving, an abusive relationship, which isn't there if you're talking about, just getting better shape. But for either one, there is a mental rewiring of your brain. It's like, because the person who usually controls you, like you said, through manipulation, coercions, all sorts of insidious acts. And that's usually their biggest power lever. And so, again, when you couple that with evolutionary, predisposition to adapt to environments, it seems like it's nearly impossible. But for yourself, so obviously you did get out. Obviously your life did improve. Obviously you did not end up being a statistic that you dealt with all the time as a member of the police force. So how'd you do that?
Well, it took about a year. It took about a year from me making that decision that I was going to wait for an opportunity that meant I could leave in a safe way. So, and that's not unusual. I've spoken to several people since, and it is sometimes about looking for that opportunity to be able to make that change and the risk assess and everything else. And, it got worse before it got better, but I think it's that, again, resilience comes into it. I would also describe myself as quite a stubborn person, determined when it's a positive, but stubborn. I would definitely say I have a stubborn side. And I think that worked to my favor, because once I left, that was it. There was no way that, I just had to keep my head down and just, like, one day at a time, just keep moving forward. Because I knew that, again, statistically, a lot of people go back because it reduces the risk. But yeah, I just had to keep pushing forward. And there was a lot of pushing forward and just trying to keep that focus on another day. And as, as time went on, it got that little bit easier, and easier to manage. But yeah, it wasn't easy, but again, I think that's the resilience that we were talking about earlier. You just keep pushing through. And I think, there's certain things that everybody faces in their lifetime, and that's when you recall, when you think, oh, well, if I can get through that, then I can get through this. I got over that, so then this suddenly doesn't feel quite so big and scary. So I think, yeah, it definitely wasn't easy, that's for sure. But eventually, as things kind of settled down, I just found that all of this energy that I'd been putting into just kind of surviving and getting through every day, suddenly that energy was there, and it was like, okay, now I can start kind of focusing on me. But that was probably a good year after, before I actually felt like I had any kind of uh, energy or mental headspace to think, right, okay, we're here. Where do I go from here? What do I want from now? And I think that was probably another year after that. Took a little bit of time.
But you did get there. And, I assume that when you left, you took your children with you. Um, how did you notice their lives changed afterwards? Because that's a big transition for them as
Mm,
well.
yeah, and I think I'm not. There's a lot of it where you're doing it for them. You get, getting up in the
Yeah.
morning for them,
Yeah.
or for him in my case as an one. But, it is that it. There's a reason. It gives you purpose, a purpose to get up, purpose to keep going, purpose to keep pushing through. I'm not, it's like I said, it's kind of 15 plus years ago now, and I interestingly kind of worked through those relationships dynamics and being able to make it work in some kind of way. Yeah, the pressure and being able to kind of change things and change their environment makes a big difference. Being able to I don't think you really understand that kind of pressure cooker environment that you're living with until you come out of it, and you realize that you don't need to worry about things that you had been worrying about for a very long time.
So when you left, did you did you have any sort of major lingering, say, issues? I guess for lack of a better word, like when people escape traumatic events or traumatic situations, there's obviously a lot of um, mental carryover, a lot of baggage left over that people carry with them. And sometimes, some people carry it better than others. Some people show, like you said, amazing resilience, and they just kind of they start to rebuild, and they build, 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 and build. They kind of like they retained some part of their kind of sunny, opposition, or sunny, optimistic attitudes, and their kind of very positive outlook on things. And some people just kind of like they survived something, and it gripped their mind, and they never really was able to let go.
Mm.
And sometimes they find, sometimes maybe over a course of many years of therapy or so, they still were wrestling with things they didn't even really appreciate at the time that was
Yeah.
affecting their lives after the fact. Was that the case in your was that with as it was with you?
So I think for me, I think especially the first couple of years was more, I would say, like more action, just kind of going through, making changes, moving things forward, keeping that momentum going. I think if I'm being truly honest, like the kind of emotional pass didn't come for a few years after. And interestingly, I did an NLP coaching course. And a lot of that course was practice based. So we would go through different NLP coaching techniques, and we would use them on each other. And I think really that was the first time that so I didn't go to therapy. I didn't have counseling. I think that was the first time that I was ever in situations where I really processed some of the things, for want of a better word. And the emotional release was pretty significant, of like lots of things that I'd been holding on to. And I think I'm quite stoic in my approach of certain things. There's lots of things that I feel, people hold on to a lot of anger and a lot of resentment, and I think I've let a lot of that go quite quickly. you know not making excuses by any means, but I think now I can look back on the situation and see things differently. And that puts me in a position where I'm able to let lots of things go and accept lots of things and be able to move forward. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. And it's not easy by any means, but I think for me, it's choosing what I want to hold on to and choosing what I let go of, not necessarily because that's what needs to be done for anybody else other than me. You know, it's a heavy weight to carry if you're going to carry it with you forever. And I just think there's lots of things that, you know, that chapter for me, to close that chapter and to be able to move on and for it not to impact these later chapters, I've got to let a lot of stuff go. You know, that might mean that I'll never get fully explanations or apologies or whatever it is that I might be waiting for. You know, that sometimes you've just got to, you know, put it down and keep walking forward. I can't carry it all with me. And that's not just for that situation, you know, that's for lots of situations that, you know, sometimes, you know, you've just got to keep walking and leave some of this stuff behind. And that's been my approach to it. It wouldn't be everybody's approach for sure, but for me, that's what works, you know, and yeah, that's my way of working it through. Is sometimes you just got to accept that, you know, I know not a lot of people will get this, and this doesn't excuse behavior by any means, but people do the best they can with the skills and the tools and the knowledge that they've got. And when they don't have that, they act out in a way they know how. And until they learn those tools, they're going to continue to act in that way. And we can't take responsibility for that in other people. They got to take responsibility for that themselves. And all I can only take responsibility and take ownership for what tools are in my toolbox and how I use those, and being aware of what tools I don't have, and actively learning those skills and those tools so that I can be a better person for me and for the people around me. But I can't take responsibility for other people and what they choose to do with that.
I think what you just said, and I've heard that before, like people do the best they can with what they know, even if they don't know very much of anything, and their skill set is very poor. They still have to work with what they have until they learn better, if they learn better. I think that shows extraordinary insight into someone else's mental faculties and someone else's emotional state. And the fact that you were able to do that, I think, sets you apart from a lot of other people. It definitely does tend to set you apart from me, because I've had anger issues a lot of my life. Not that my life was ever bad, but I don't know. It's just kind of something I've always kind of wrestled with. And then you get to the point where you just close that chapter. It's not my life, moving on. It's been pretty hard for me. And I'd never really understood how to really get there. I understood, like, cognitively why I should do that. No, you can't walk around angry all the time. I don't walk around angry. I'm not an angry person. I'm not an unhappy person at all. But still, you know, there's something in the back of my head that still is like there, that doesn't really ever let go. You know what I mean? I feel like maybe that's a characteristic of a lot of the people that you see who come to you or are part of your wellness program. It's probably like that. You know, I've heard that characterized in many different ways. I mean, we talked about earlier your insignia there is the phoenix. What is it? It's a bird that rises from fire. So in order to rise from fire, you have to have a fire. So, and maybe that's my fire. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sacred point in your life where you get to the point where you are at peace with what happened and you've moved on. You know, I think I represent a lot of the people I've listened to or listening to this program who say, I just can't quite get there. And I can't understand why. And because, again, I'm not an unhappy person. I'm not an angry person. I don't yell and scream. I'm not abusive to people around me. But still, I guess it's just kind of like just simmering resentment, leftover resentment.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think for me, I got to the point where why am I holding on to this? Like, how long do I hold on to this for before I get the answers that I'm looking for, or I understand it in a different way that allows me to let go of it? And I think there was a part of me that just knew I was never going to hear what I wanted to hear. I was never going to get the explanation that I wanted or needed. That he was never going to see it from my perspective. All of the conversations in the world were not going to change the situation, if that makes sense. So it just got to the point where I was like, if I keep carrying this with me, it means that he is still influencing my world and my life. And on balance, I wasn't prepared to let that happen. So for me, letting that go completely detached the influence and ultimately that control. But I get that it's different for different people. And that didn't happen overnight. That took some time. That did take some time. But I think also, I think it's much easier as time passes on, and when you look at it without the emotions that you're feeling at the time, to be able to look back on it almost like you're watching it play out on a cinema screen. It's much easier to see things from different perspectives. And again, not excusing any of the behaviors at all, but I can look back on it and think, if you were able to, in that moment, if you had this tool in your toolbox to be able to deal with that situation in a different way, that situation would have played out very differently. But if somebody has only ever got a hammer in their toolbox, they're going to hit everything with a hammer. And everybody can stand around and say, use the screwdriver. You don't need a hammer here, you need a screwdriver. But if that person's never been shown a screwdriver and been taught how to use a screwdriver, they're going to hit everything with a hammer.
It's definitely true. And I think, again, the fact that you can show that amount of insight to someone who was so horrible to you for so long speaks volumes about you, especially now, because we live in a very kind of like a polarized world now where everything is black and white. There's good guys and there's bad guys, and bad guys act like this, good guys don't act like that. And I think when you try to tell people it's like that's not really how life really works, well, you get these accusations that you're kind of you're making excuses for them, or you're blaming the victim or something like that, or you're letting them off the hook. And no, it's really not the case. And you have to do that for your own, almost for your own therapy, therapeutic benefit, because you have to realize it's almost like, I hate to say this, it's almost like a resignation. It's like, well, I can't do anything for them, So now when you have people come into your wellness and your coaching program here, I know you said earlier when we started this that it's hard to kind of like break it down into, a few lines as to what it is you do and how everyone responds to it. But and kind of you have to have noticed that there are similar threads that are very common threads that are among a lot of the people that you work with. So if there are any, what are those common threads of the people that come to you and seek your counseling or seek your coaching?
Well, I think it kind of picks up on what I was just saying about tools in the toolbox. I think if I was to pick one thing that is the common thread, is that people want to do better with whatever. They want to do better, and they recognize that they don't have the tools in the toolbox to do better. So they want to either learn a different way of thinking or a different approach to be able to do things in a different way that has a better result, or they want to learn tools, strategies, frameworks that help them to manage things in a different way for a better result. And whether that's teenagers that are trying to cope with, school pressures and things like that, or whether that is, a manager in a company who has a new team and their usual style isn't working with that team, so they want different ways to approach it. I would say that is kind of, that's probably, it's a great question, because it's helping me to think about it differently. But I think that's the common thread. People want to do better, whatever, and they need more tools in their toolbox to be able to do that, or they want to understand what tools they already have and how they can use them for a different result.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your take on that, because as a fitness trainer, you tend to find there's a common like end result that most people are chasing. Most of it is weight loss, just body composition. It's looking better in your clothes, feeling better about yourself when you see your body in the mirror, that sort of thing. So, and then that's a very tangible, very kind of numbers based sort of goal to work towards. Now, along the way, a lot of times, at least in my case, I introduce them other things here that are not so obviously tied into weight loss, that they like as well too. It's like, oh wow, I can do that now. Oh wow, I feel better now as I do this. I can walk across an airport without getting winded carrying my luggage, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to know, was there anything in particular, like an end result or like a particular problem that people generally come to you, or is it just kind of like all over the map?
No, I think it is really varied. I think the journey that people go on, there's lots of similarities. So even though that the starting point and the end point are very varied, I think the journey that people go on in understanding themselves better, and when they understand themselves better and they've got that clarity around who they are, what's important to them, what do they want, then they start to understand the people around them better. So their relationships with other people improve, whether that's personal or professional relationships improve. And I think genuinely it's just that confidence in knowing that they've got tools in the toolbox to face whatever comes up. And even though some of the tools, you can see in sessions when people are talking it through, they're kind of dusting off these tools that they've not used for a long time. They've kind of gone to the bottom, because we're creatures of habit, aren't we? So we tend to deal with things in the same way. So even if we're using the tools in the toolbox analogy, most of us probably only use, if you think of a toolbox having that top layer and then that big section underneath, most of us really only go through life using the tools that are in that top layer, but we've got all of this other stuff underneath. And that, for me, is what coaching helps people with, is recognizing all of these other tools that they've got in there that they could use to help have a different outcome. Because we're creatures of habit, we tend to do things in the same way. And then when we don't get the results that we're looking for, we still do things in the same way. We just try to go harder, faster with it. And then we don't get a different result. So to get a different result, we have to try things in a different way. And I think that's what coaching helps people with, is exploring what alternative ways there are to try things differently. And I have no doubt at all that that's what you do in your world, is give them different ways of trying things to get different results. Because ultimately people come to us as coaches because what they're trying isn't working, but they can only see certain options ahead of them. And our role as coaches is to help them to explore those different alternatives to help them get where they want to get to.
Right. And I'm very openly experimental in my training of people, and that I'm flat out honest about that. It's like, well, I get an idea when we're doing something, a flash of an idea, and someone, let's try this instead. I have no idea how this is going to turn out. Um, I know it's not going to hurt you, so I'm not fearful of that. But this might be a better way. This may not be a better way. Let's just try it anyway. I think that kind of rubs off on people as you see that kind of improvisation right there, and what you said something earlier about strong woman competitions. I didn't really appreciate until you said it. You said the workouts are very varied. The training is very varied, very varied. You said it's very diverse. There we go.
Yeah.
I don't think I really appreciated that until you saw that, because I look at strong man, strong woman competition training. It all to me looks like a lot of the same thing over and over again. And so the fact that you said, no, it's very diverse, and you are putting yourself in different situations with different loads, and you have to kind of give yourself a kind of a universal adaptive training program. I didn't appreciate that until you said that, and I'm now thinking that probably has bled over into what is now your coaching program. Has probably directly influenced it, probably maybe subconsciously. I don't know. What's your take on that?
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I think so. With strong man, strong woman, there's always 5 events, and you tend to have a push and a pull. So there's normally something off the floor, something overhead, a push, a pull, and then you've got like a static event and a moving event. So you've got to be like omnicompetent in all of those areas. And I think what helped me to be as successful as I was very rarely the strongest in any of those categories. Very rarely did I win an event, but I would always be in the top 3. Every event, I would always be in the top 3, which meant, as from a scoring points point of view, I was always near the top enough to be able to position, because I trained everything. But you'll have people who are naturally, stronger overhead or stronger off the floor. You've got quite a lot of people who are power lifters, so very static lifters. But I loved running around with stuff. I loved things like, carrying kegs and things like that. I loved the moving events, which a lot of people hated. But you still have to train the things that you hate. You still have to train the things that you don't enjoy. And I think that does transfer over to life. You can't always just pick and choose the things that you're good at. You have to pick and choose the things that you are weaker at, and the things that really frustrate you, and the things that you enjoy, because you need to be an all-rounder. And it's great to have your strengths, but you also need to be good at the fundamental stuff as well. And that means that you have to put the work into the things that you're not as good at. And that's the most uncomfortable bit about anything, isn't it? Is when we know we're terrible at something, but we've got to put the work in to get better at it. So it definitely transfers over.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of characteristic of people in general. I think that's kind of something that we learn probably from schools, like, double down on the strengths and stay away from the things that you're not so good at, because school teaches you like every mistake, every failure is terrible, or is the end of the world. At least that's the impression I got from school. It's like, it's very intolerant of failure, and I think that's why we grow up with this misconception about what failure is.
It also doesn't build resilience either, and I think that's another challenge, in that as much as we want to try and make things easier for people, ultimately we're making things more difficult further down the line.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes a little bit of pain and discomfort up front is actually what makes it easier further down the line.
Right, exactly. So, going forward with Phoenix Well Life and Coaching, where to from here?
That's a great question. I've set some goals this year. So not like, so many times I've been asked this question, I'm like, oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. So my son's 21 now. He's kind of off grown, doing his thing. So I am in this really great place, like for the first time in a very long time, don't have those responsibilities of parenting and things like that. And so I'm working now on the business. I'm really just trying to find that balance between being able to pick and choose all of the work that I love to do, but also trying to build a business that's sustainable longer term. The goal is that by the time I'm 50, which is 6 years' time, is to be able to work part time. And so I'm just kind of building up the things that I know I can keep the business going. So I want to be able to impact more people, but not necessarily work more hours. So looking at
Yeah.
ways that I can support people to do that. So I'm actually really enjoying learning more. I'm doing a business course at the moment to be able to learn how to do that more. So, putting more tools into the toolbox, to keep going back to the same analogy, and learning how to use the tools that I've already got in different ways to build a business that ultimately I can still work. So I don't want to retire. I don't think I ever want to stop doing this, but I also I want to be able to travel and things like that. So I had a goal this year to travel every other month. So far that is all on track. I've visited different countries every other month and been able to work abroad and still be able to travel. So I feel like I'm in a very fortunate, very grateful for the position that I'm in right now to be able to do that, because I think being able to do work that you love and to be able to do it in a way that means that you can live the life that you've always kind of planned out for living is a great place to be in. So yeah, more of the same but less. If that
More the
makes
same,
sense.
more the same, but less.
Yeah, more of the same but less. Smarter, not harder. But yeah,
Right.
no aspirations to be one of these 6-7 figure coaches or anything like that. I think it's, for me, it's about impact rather than profit. And I think I'm really fortunate to work with some great charities and get some really good opportunities to work with people that there's almost a greater impact, and I really love doing that. So yeah, more of the same. That's the plan.
I have a closing tradition on this podcast where the guest has the final word. Okay, so an hour's we've been sitting here for an hour now. If there's one thing that you'd like people to walk away from, if they remember nothing else, what would you say it would be?
So one word for people to take away from this
Well, no,
conversation.
not necessarily one word, unless that's what you want to do, but like one thing, like one theme or one subject, like in 1 or 2 lines or something like that.
Okay. I think you've been talking for me long enough now to know that one word would be practically impossible. So I
Yeah.
think one thing I would say, and it does come up a lot, is the things that the characteristic and the attributes that you kind of drew upon to get you through your most difficult times. They're the things that you need to tap into proactively to build and move forward. So if you think about what you found out about you in your most difficult times, and know that you can use that proactively to build your future.
Zoe Thompson, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And everyone who's listening, this has been Zoe Thompson. She's an international strongwoman competitor, ranked second in the UK, ninth overall in Europe. She is the owner and coach of a life and well-being coach, or life and well-being, Phoenix Life and Wellbeing. I'm sorry, Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching Services, and domestic abuse survivor, 20-year veteran of the UK Police. And she also was willing to give me a second chance after I completely blew it the first time with the internet going out, which wasn't my fault, but still, it's my show. Thanks again for that, Zoe. I
Oh no,
appreciate
it
it.
was good. I'm glad we got to have this conversation. It's been really good to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you as well. And everyone who's listening, obviously, I'll put all the contact information in the show notes. That you can reach out to Zoe if you so please. And this has been the Fitness Reborn podcast. Move forever. I'll see you on the other side. Peace.